My name is Howard LeVoot. I am the Brotherhood President from Tel Beth Or in La Mirada, California. Thank you for all joining today. And that is over 100 people that have registered to listen to Ben Lesser speak on the Holocaust. We have people from the Men of Reformed Judaism Brotherhoods, Jewish Federation of Men's Club, Sisterhoods, Friends, Family, locally, back east, and even contacted from Canada. Also, I'd like to welcome Rabbi Mark Goldfarb from my temple, the religious school students, and the teacher, Deborah Goldfarb. I want to let you know we have from our temple, second generation of David Youngman and Art Hess to join us today as well. I want to thank the following people to make it possible today. Our chairman, Shaul Salisbury, coordinated and arranged this program. Thank you to the director of ZACHOR Foundation, Gail Gerber Lesser, and our audio visual, Ralph Krauss. Also our publicity people of Phil and Susan Carey, along with Susan on the webmaster, Julie Nolte, and many people behind the scenes. I'd like to turn it over to Ralph to explain procedures of questions and answers. Thank you for joining us. Sit back to listen to Ben Lesser.
Hi, I'm here to help with the question and answer portion during Ben's event. If you have any questions for Ben at any point during this presentation, just go ahead and click chat at the bottom of your screen and just message them to me. Now, before we begin, we'd like to share a video about Ben and about his organization, the ZACHOR Holocaust Remembrance Foundation.
It's human nature to want to live. When you know your life is at stake, any minute you could be killed. You lived from minute to minute and prayed a lot and hoped that nothing will happen to you. If you don't want to have another Holocaust in the world, you have to talk about it. Nazis did not start with killing, they started with hate. Once love and respect was eradicated by hate, it was easy to kill. I have dedicated my life to end this hatred. When we educate, we can prevent, and then we will ultimately prevail.
Never forget is the driving force behind the ZACHOR Holocaust Remembrance Foundation. We are dedicated to ensuring the remembrance of the Holocaust with community-building efforts designed to guide positive change. Our mission is to make sure the Holocaust never happens again. Education is the gateway to prevention, and we provide tools for curriculum-based Holocaust studies, which teaches the virtues of perseverance, all while promoting peace and acceptance.
It's possible to let tragedy or trauma become a reason to stop living. But it's also possible to live through extreme circumstances and commit to a life that has meaning, a life that matters. Now, more than ever, ZACHOR needs your support to continue our mission through educational programs, events, and awareness to never again.
Good morning, good afternoon, Thank you. Thank you for this wonderful event this morning, Temple Beth Or, for making this possible. Howard Levoot, the president of the Brotherhood, and for Shaw Salisbury for making this possible today. We are happy to be here. I just want to tell you real quick a little bit about ZACHOR. We are dedicated to spreading awareness and to never forget. Our mission is to preserve the memory of the Holocaust. We have educational tools. We have student programs. We have a I Shout Out program, which want to introduce you all to our website, and to hopefully you'll take a little bit of time to visit our website. It's www.zachorfoundation.org, and please take the time and visit us. Make sure to shout out and check out our ZACHOR Holocaust curriculum. We just recently launched it. It's the first ever Holocaust educational site by a survivor, written by Ben Lesser himself, and it was designed for teachers by teachers. This is a free website for educational purposes. Anybody could come onto it at any time. It has wonderful lesson plans that are just turnkey with video, photographs, factual timeline. It is perfect for those of you that have students in junior high and high school, and older than that, or just history buffs. So I would like to, at this point, before I sign off, wish you a very happy, healthy day. And I hope that some of you that are across the country are staying warm. And without any further ado, I want to introduce my father, Ben Lesser.
Thank you, Gail. That was a wonderful presentation. Beautiful. I want to welcome all of you. This is very close to my heart, and it's very important for me to continue to do that for as long as I can. And hopefully that'll be for quite a long time yet. Yes, my friends, I come to you from an era in history where civilization lost its humanity, its heart. A time when there were only three kinds of people in the world. There were the killers, the victims, and the bystanders. Imagine the whole world. We found out now that everybody knew about it, what's happening. They all knew about it in Auschwitz, they all knew about the killing, but they decided to be bystanders and keep quiet, say nothing. So I started the ZACHOR Holocaust Remembrance Foundation to keep the memory alive and keep this world from acquiring amnesia. I'm so glad to speak to you, a wonderful audience. I wish it could have been in person, but it wasn't meant to be. I'd like to introduce my family first. This is my father. You see my father, my mother, my little brother, my oldest brother, Moishi, and my sister, Goldie, and Tuliko, my little brother. Now, none of these people in the picture survived the war. Every one of them were slaughtered by the Nazis. My sister, Goldie, lived in Munkacs with her grandparents. Munkacs was Hungary at the time. And my mother comes from Hungary, from Munkacs, and her whole family lived there. And this is my sister Lola, the only sister that survived. We were a family of 7, and out of the 7, 2 of us survived. Lola, my sister Lola, and I. Now we lived in Krakow, Poland, a beautiful city. My father's side of the family all comes from Krakow. And we also my mother would take us kids after school in the summer to Munkaj to be with her side of the family, grandparents and uncles and aunts and cousins, the whole big family in Munkaj. And in the winter, we would come back to Krakow to go to school, and we lived in Krakow. So my sister Goldie was caught in Munkaj when the war broke out. So she was with her grandparents there, and she could not leave Munkaj, Hungary anymore because the war broke out, so she was stuck in Munkaj. But the rest of us were all in Krakow, Poland. This is the building we lived in. The three windows that you see to my left, I guess your right, on the ground floor were part of our apartment. And the third window was my bedroom. One morning, early in the morning, and all of a sudden the whole building started to shake and rattle. So I ran to the window to see what happened. And when I came to the window, this is what I saw. Tanks were rolling down the street. Following the tanks, there were half-tracks. And every few steps, a soldier would jump out of the half-track, get on the sidewalk, and this is how they occupied the city. There was no fighting. And following the half-tracks, there were the Wehrmacht, the foot soldiers with their shiny black boots and their goose steps. It was quite impressionable for 11-year-old kid. I wasn't quite 11. I was one more month shy of being 11. So it was quite impressionable, but we had no idea what to expect. If my parents knew something, they wouldn't tell us kids. But that day after they marched in, my father did call us kids to the table, the dining room, and he said, look, out from this moment on, there'll be no more crying, no more disobeying. You have to listen to everything we're going to tell you. We don't know what's going to happen, but we have to be aware. And it didn't take long. Within 5 days after occupation of Krakow, we found out Nazi brutality, what it was all about. In this building, a truck pulled up to the building early in the morning one day, and they were rapping on the gate. And as the super came running out, what's going on? All they wanted to know, these were soldiers in a truck, all they wanted to know where the Jewish people lived. And he was quick to oblige. He showed them our apartment, and he also showed them the other Jewish apartment. There was another young couple who had 2 daughters. They were a little younger than me. We used to play after school in the yard. The mother gave birth to an infant little boy 2 months earlier. That was the apartment they lived in. And anyway, they came running in and pistol whipping all of us. It was early in the morning. We were still in bed. And in their hands, they held sacks, open sacks, and they were yelling at us to throw in all our valuables, money, gold, jewelry, anything they can find, even silverware they threw in there, candelabras, everything they threw inside. And they were beating up my father to open up the safe. While my father is opening the safe, we hear this screaming at our neighbor's apartment, the other Jewish couple. So my sister Lola and I ran out through the kitchen door, and we went into their apartment through their kitchen door. And this is what we saw. We saw this monster was holding the baby by its legs and swinging it. And he was screaming to the parents, "Make him shut up." And the parents and the daughters were yelling, our baby, don't hurt our baby." And with a smirk on his face, you can see he was enjoying what he was doing. He smashes the baby's head into a doorpost, killing it instantly. Well, all of us jumped on this monster. And of course, his buddies from our apartment, wherever they were, came running in to see what was going on. And then they saw us on top of him. They pulled us off, pistol whipped us, and they told him, "Come on, Hans, let's go." I guess it was a little surprising or a shock to the soldiers too. They have never seen anything like this, I'm sure, being this infant. And I can never forget this baby screaming and that sudden silence and what came out of his head. My God, what a sight. And anyway, they took all of their valuables that they gathered, threw it in the truck, and they took off. That was the 5th day after occupation. Now, my father's business was wine and syrup. He had the wine and syrup factories, was kosher wine and syrup. And he also had a chocolate factory. He was the first one in Poland to manufacture chocolate-covered wafers, like Kit Kat, but they were this shape and the shape of a little animal, like a rabbit, a bear, and they were tinfoils, covered with tinfoil. I remember whenever my father would come home, us kids would search his pockets to see if we can find any sweets, any candy. And he made sure that he had some every time he came home. Anyway, his businesses were confiscated. He went to his wine and syrup factory one day, and there were soldiers stationed, and they chased him away. They said confiscated, and they wouldn't even let him go in. He went to the chocolate factory the same way. Soldiers chased him away. They wouldn't even let him take the briefcase out of there. Anyway, he came home, and you can imagine my father's face. It wasn't the same man again. He lost his business. A man works all his life to build up a little business to support the family. And just like that, it's taken away from you. New ordinances kept coming fast and furious, one after another. Of course, Jewish people had to wear the Star of David. Our IDs were changed for other IDs, and in it they had a big red J for Judah in the ID. And of course, ordinances were coming in. They had a curfew where you could not leave the house after 7 p.m. until 7 a.m. in the morning. Now, if a Jewish person disobeyed any of these new ordinances or accidentally went out without the Star of David or without his IDs, there was only one punishment for the Jewish people. There were no judges, no juries, no prisons even. They simply shot you. And every morning you can go out in the street and see dead bodies laying, and there were people going around gathering these bodies. Oh my God, I'm telling you, it was like open season for killing Jewish people. And you didn't even have to be a Nazi to kill a Jew. It could just be a Pole or anybody. Imagine if you walked on the street and somebody comes up to you, I like your jacket, give it to me. And if you didn't, he could kill you. There's no accountability. I mean, the Nazis would probably thank him for doing it. It was a strange, strange world. And this didn't last too long because new ordinances came in that Jewish people can no longer reside in Krakow. But they gave us a choice. The first time in history, they gave Jewish people that choice. If you want to stay in Krakow, you have to go into that sections that they made into ghetto. And I hope all of you know what ghettos are. Or they would let you leave Krakow, but you cannot live in a big city. You can live in a small community neighboring Krakow. My sister Lola, the one who survived, she was a beautiful girl. Both of my sisters were beauties. And she had a boyfriend that pursued her. His name was Michael. And Michael came to my father and he said, Mr. Lesser, you know how I feel about Lola. Someday I'd love to marry her. But please do me a favor. I'll take care of everything. Just come to the same community where my family is going, because I want to be near her, near you and near her. Well, when my father had a choice going to a ghetto or going to a small community where Michael's family went, he chose the small community and he agreed. And Michael came to our house, helped us pack and load a wagon that he hired a driver, horse and buggy with driver and a big wagon. And we loaded up everything that we can carry. Now, we were not allowed to take any furniture, but anything else was okay. And we're now just about to leave Krakow when we found out that my father had $1,000 American that he saved up for a rainy day. $1,000 in those days was a small fortune. So he took a siddur, a prayer book, and he pasted it inside between the pages. He pasted the American dollars, and he put it in a sack full of other religious Jewish literature, books. Every Jewish house had a lot of Jewish books, and we had 2 sacks full. It was loaded, and we're now leaving to going to that community called Niepolomice. As we left the city of Krakow, we suddenly see a bunch of soldiers and 2 husky Nazis jump on the wagon, and all they wanted to know, do we have any Jewish literature, books? And they saw those 2 sacks full of books. They picked them up and heaved them on the side of the road. On the side of the road, they had a mountain full of books. All the Jewish people who did not go into the ghetto had to leave on this road. And they were waiting, collecting all of the Jewish books. And eventually, after everyone went through, they would have a bonfire on the side of the road with Jewish literature. Well, when they took our books away, my sister Lola spoke a beautiful German. She walks up to this Nazi and she says, look, my father is a writer. He wrote his autobiography let him keep this one book. And he looked at her. Maybe he liked the way she spoke beautiful German. He says, okay, we'll give you 5 minutes if we can find it. So imagine all of us started to climb on this mountain of books, trying to find this one sefer, one religious book. They all looked alike. They were all black or brown, leather bound. And when you climb on a mountain of books, you keep sliding down. Anyway, he watched us do this for 5 minutes, and then he chased us away. Needless to say, we didn't find the right book. And now we're on our way to Neapolomice. You can't imagine my father. He was a changed man. How is he going to feed a family of 6? Remember, we were a family of 7, but one sister, Goldie, was in Munkac in Hungary. So we're only 6 here. He's going to a new community. It's not like you can get a job because Jewish people were not allowed to be hired to work. So you couldn't recognize him. He was so down. What is he going to do? How is he going to feed the family? When we came to that house that my future brother-in-law rented for us an apartment, you see that house, which was painted by my sister Lola, my sister that has survived. Lola was a wonderful artist, and she painted that from memory in 1950. So she still remembered that. And so half of this building was our apartment. The other half was the farmer, who happened to be an apple orchard farmer. And in the middle between the 2 apartments, there was a big oven where you can bake breads. I mean, everyone baked their own breads in those days, in those small communities. So we came into the apartment, and my future brother-in-law, Michael, found out what happened to my father. They took away all his money. He brought my father a sack full of flour, 100 pounds of flour, figuring he'll be able to bake bread to feed the family. When my father saw the flour, his face lit up. He was so happy to see it. And instead of baking bread, he started to bake pretzels. Why pretzels? All you need for pretzels is flour, water, and salt. And those ingredients he had. Then he took those pretzels, he went to the neighboring bars, taverns, and he offered it for sale. It was a novelty, and they started to buy these pretzels. Now my father could bake a bread to feed the family, and little by little, he became a baker in that community. From baking bread and pretzels, he went to bake mandelbread, and then he went to bake all kind of rolled cakes and unbelievable. I have no idea where my father learned that, where he got the skill to do that. But he and I was 12 years at a time, and I remember baking with my father. And to this day, I still remember some of the recipes, and occasionally I bake something for the family and friends. So now, this didn't last very long in that community. My sister Lola marries Michael, and we had a group of people, friends, that came to the wedding. It was in the backyard of our apartment, and that was not allowed. They did not allow more than 5 Jewish people together, but we took a chance. Now, You see Michael and Lola there on top. And my mother and my little brother, he leans on my mother. And there I am in this blue suit, I believe it was. I was 12 years old at the time. That's the only picture of me. Now, as you see these people, there were more people that are not in my picture. I know my father was there, my oldest brother, and somehow they're not in the picture. But from all these people that you see, only 3 of us survived the war. Michael and Lola and I. Everybody else that you see in the picture was slaughtered. None of them survived. Anyway, after Lola married, they moved out and they moved into a duplex. My older brother also married. He moved out of the house. Now, the only people in the house were my mother, father, myself, my little brother, Tuli. And one evening, when the owner of this duplex where Michael and Lola lived happened to be also the mayor of Neapolomice. He was the mayor of that town. He comes home one day and he says, Michael, Lola, save yourselves. I heard the rumor that the Jewish people, there will be a podlava. Podlava is a raid against the Jewish people. Well, when Michael heard that, he went out and hired a horse and a buggy. And in the middle of the night, we all smuggled out and we put our belongings on top of that wagon, whatever we could carry, and we left the city. Now, it's a good thing we left Neapolomice because the night after, they did have a raid. And thousands of people were rounded up and thrown into trucks. And we found this out after the war when I and my sister Lola, who survived, went back to Neapolomice to find out what happened to all the people. And we found out that thousands of people were placed in trucks and taken to the forest. And the men were given shovels and they had to dig their own grave, and everyone was shot. And then they left a few of the men to cover up, and then they were killed. How did we find this out? Some of these farmers who used to go to the forest to pick mushrooms and berries, blackberries and different berries to sell in the market next day, were there in the forest, and they were hiding behind trees, and they saw what was going on, and they were telling us the story. So it's a good thing we were leaving Neapolomice, and we're now on our way to Bochnia. Bochnia was a mid-sized city, and it had a ghetto. That meant we had to go inside the ghetto. But Bochnia ghetto had a very bad reputation. What happened? Every once in a while, 3 or 4 dump trucks would come in the middle of the night into the ghetto, and the Nazis would go from house to house, pull out the children from their beds, throw them into these dump trucks. You can and fill up these dump trucks. You can imagine the parents were screaming for the children are screaming for the parents. And as they filled up these dump trucks, they pulled out of the ghetto. Obviously, the parents were running behind these trucks and screaming for their children. But these cultured people had machine guns at the end of each truck. And as they saw the parents running behind the truck, They opened machine gun fire and mowed down the parents in front of the children. Well, that resonated throughout Europe. In every ghetto, the Jewish people knew, stay away from Bochnia Ghetto because of these atrocities. And really, we never knew what happened to these kids. We can imagine, but none of them survived. We had no choice. We had to go into this ghetto or stay in Neapolomice. So we decided to go to Bochnia Ghetto. And the driver was able to take us inside the ghetto and leave his ID with the guards, and then they would let him out. And we are inside the ghetto in this wagon, and all of a sudden, Michael sees his friend, a school buddy that he used to go to school with, by the name of Farber. And Farber was a Jewish policeman. He had a uniform on. They had no weapons. All he had is a baton hanging on the side of his pants. And so Michael says to him, he says, Farber, what's going on? Who are you? So he explained, he was a Jewish policeman inside the ghetto. These policemen had no weapons, and their mission was to keep order inside the ghetto. And if the Nazis needed some workers outside the ghetto, they would tell the police station, those policemen had to round up the men to go out and do the work. So they had a mission, but some of them were very, very good to us, and others were not so good. So anyway, to tell you, he found us a place. He found a place for Michael and Lola and his family, and he found a place for my father, my mother, myself, and my little brother. So just to give you an idea what living inside the ghetto was like. Excuse me. The rooms that we were living in had other 8 people. So we were 4 and there were 8 others. Now there were 12 of us in one room. There were no beds. All we had is straw on the ground. At top of the straw, there were blankets, and there were blankets hanging from the ceiling, partitioning off each family. So you can imagine what life was like. Now, every person in the ghetto had to work. My job, I was 12 years old at the time. My job was working in a uniform factory and sew on buttons on the uniforms, which was an easy job. But this was going on for almost a year. And one day, Farber, that friendly capo, the friendly policeman, comes to Michael and he says, Michael, Lola, save yourselves. I heard there's going to be a rumor. There may be a podlava, a raid tonight in the ghetto. So hide yourself. Now, ever since these kids would be pulled out of their beds and thrown into these dump trucks, every house inside the ghetto and every apartment had a hiding place. They called it ghetto. They call it a bunker. That's when I found out what our bunker was. Now, we had some broken down furniture in the room, in this one room that we lived in. By the way, there was no indoor plumbing. There was an outdoor outhouse, and plumbing was outdoor. We had a table, we had boxes for chairs, and we had a little stove. And then there was one piece of furniture that was beautiful piece of furniture. Among all of these junky pieces, it stood out. It was a place where you can hang your coats and jackets. It was an armoire. I didn't pay attention to it. But now that we had to hide someplace, I found out that this armoire was our hiding place. As you opened the door, you pushed the closing apart, the back panel would slide apart, and there was a hole in the wall, and 12 of us could crawl to that hole, get on the other side, and stand between two buildings. Now, the last person would then close the door from inside, put the closing back, close the back panel, and there we stood between two buildings. Lucky for us, the outside of the buildings were connected. The only open part was between the two buildings was the sky. And it was snowing, it was freezing cold. And we were standing there, all 12, holding each other and hearing all night screams, dogs barking, shooting, all of this going on. And towards morning, it got quiet. When it got quiet, one of our people from the room went out and he went outside and he came back. He says, okay, the coast is clear, you can come out. And all of us came out. And as we walked out to the outside, we couldn't believe what our eyes has just seen. We have seen people torn apart by dogs, mothers holding their babies, pieces of people all over the place. And there were people going around with push carts and picking up the bodies and pieces of bodies and putting it in push carts, and then pushing these push carts into the ghetto square, Bochnia Ghetto Square, and they would pile them up as high as possible. And these cultured people would come with gasoline cans and pour gasoline over the bodies, and they had lighted a bonfire in Bochnia Ghetto Square, a human bonfire. You can't imagine the smell and how we felt when we saw what was going on. But we didn't see any more soldiers. They were all out. And I wanted to see what happened to my sister, because I knew that my sister Lola and her husband and his family had a hiding place in a doghouse. You heard me right, in a doghouse. You pulled the floor from the doghouse up, and they had a step ladder, and inside there was provisions and bedding for 7 people. There was only room for 7 people there. And that was all they were 7 people altogether. So I went to find out from my sister what happened. And this is what I found out. Michael and Lola are telling me the story. What I saw in front of my eyes, I'll explain in a little while. As they were about to go into this doghouse, another Jewish policeman by the name of Morris Schiller comes up to them, and he says, Michael, I know about your hiding place in the doghouse. Unless you take my mother and my sister along, I'm going to tell the authorities. Well, Lola started to cry. What do you mean? But he had the power over them, and there was only room for 7. Now there were 9. So Lola and Michael decided to stay out of the doghouse, and they started to walk away. His mother started to run after him. She says, "No, you can't do that. You're newlyweds. You still have your whole life ahead of you. Let me be out." Of course, they wouldn't hear of it, and they just walked away. And the 7 went inside the doghouse, and they walked away. And as they're walking the street, they see Farber, that friendly couple, walking up to them. He says, "Michael, Lola, what are you doing walking the streets? Don't you know what's about to happen? Hide." So Michael tells Farber what happened, Morris Schiller, what he did. So Farber says, "Michael, Lola, I have a place to hide where you can hide. Where my sister and her 2 children are hiding, there's room enough for you. Follow me." And they followed him to a leather factory, a tannery. And above the tannery was a water tank. He says, "My sister and her 2 children are inside that water tank. There's a stepladder, go up. Inside there's a rope, you can lower yourself. And in the morning, when the coast is clear, I'm gonna give you a certain knock on the tank, and you'll know the coast is clear, you can come out." Well, this is what they did. They went up on the ladder, they lowered themselves into the tank. They saw his sister knee-deep in water, holding an infant, which was asleep. I guess they must have given it some medication to sleep. And next to the mother, standing the little girl, and up to her waist in water and shaking. So Michael picked up the little girl from the water. Lola picked up the child from the infant from the mother. And they stood there inside the water. There were little water rats swimming around and nibbling at their feet. They kept kicking them off. This was going on all night. And they heard what we heard: shooting, dogs barking, screaming, yelling. And towards morning, all of a sudden they heard that knock on the tank. The coast is clear. Well, they all helped themselves, pushing themselves out on the rope, and they came on the other side. And after they put a little circulation back into their legs, Lola and Michael wanted to see what happened to his family at the doghouse. So the first thing they did is went to the doghouse, and this is what they saw. They saw the whole family with the bullet hole in the middle of their head. Even the dog was shot. Little Marika on the corner here, 7-year-old sister of Michael, she had her birthday 2 months earlier, and Lola made her a doll, so she's still holding on to that doll. When Lola saw that, she started to scream. And when Michael heard her, he says, "No, Lola, you can't scream. They may still hear you. They might still be burning people. They may hear it." So with a quelched cry, they knew what they had to do. According to the Jewish religion, you're supposed to bury your loved ones between 12 or 24 hours. And Michael was a religious young man, and even Lola was religious. So he went out and somehow he found a rickety wheelbarrow. So he put the family on the wheelbarrow. He put the family on the wheelbarrow, and he's pushing them up the hill to the cemetery. The cemetery on top of the hill was a Jewish cemetery. In the snow and sleet, he keeps pushing them. And finally, they arrived in the cemetery. And this was the wheelbarrow that, by the way, all of these pictures are pictures out of memories that my sister Lola painted. And I want you to know that all of these pictures are now at Yad Vashem in Israel. The originals are there, but we have copies. And so they're pushing it up to the cemetery. At the cemetery, they found one shovel, and Michael is working so hard, and Lola, with her bare hand, is pulling out pieces of ground, frozen ground, and they finally buried their family. They finally buried the family into a grave. And all of a sudden, Morris Schiller walks up to them. He says, it wasn't my fault. And it wasn't his fault, because his own mother and his own sister were also killed. But he says to them, that graves that you just dug for your family, you're gonna have to take your family out, because I want that grave for my mother and my sister. Well, my sister Lola started to cry, and Michael says, look, he's got the power over us. They had to remove the bodies, put them back on the wheelbarrow. They went to another spot and they made another grave to bury them. But meanwhile, they hear, while they're burying the family, they hear a Jeep coming up the hill to the cemetery gate. And it stops right at the gate. And two SS men jump out, and they jump out and they yell, Morris Schiller, Morris Schiller. He said, jawohl, here I am. They walk up to him, they pull out a revolver, and they shot him. This is what they did to people who have seen too much. They didn't want to leave any witnesses. So they came for him and they killed him. Lola and Michael, after burying the family, went down the hill to their apartment, holding each other and crying. While they were in the apartment, they heard, well, to continue telling you this story, I'm going to have to skip how they, Lola and Michael, and how I and my whole family were able to escape the ghetto. This is a story in itself. And to tell you that would take me another 45 minutes. And I know I don't have that much time. So I'll skip this. I'll only tell you that much, that if you really want to know, it's in my book. In my book, you can find everything in there, a whole story, plus a lot of interesting things. But right now, going back to the story, we were outside the ghetto in an apartment with Gentiles all around us. And Michael was looking for a truck driver, and he found a truck driver who was hauling coal. And he asked him, look, can you convert that truck into where the coal is on top, and between the coal and the chassis, there is room for 12 people or 10 people to hide. And we will pay you for this a lot of money. And then you will take us to the border of Czechoslovakia and Poland, and we will have a smuggler rearranged, and this smuggler would smuggle us across to Czechoslovakia. And from Czechoslovakia, we had to be smuggled into Hungary. Hungary was still a free country. This was in 1943. So he found a truck driver who agreed, and he converted his truck. And we had people who, after you find out, who paid for every person to go to be smuggled through. So this is the coal truck that they made. And coal on top, and between the coal and the chassis, there was room for 10 people like sardines to lay there. So the first ones, 8 people went out from Jewish people from the ghetto that were able to escape with us. They went out and they went in to be transported in that truck, and they paved the way for 2 of us. So the first ones went Michael and Lola. Why did they go first? Because we couldn't always trust the driver. Sometimes the driver will take the money up front, and then he would take you to the Gestapo or the SS, and they would pay him a ransom money for turning in Jews. So we couldn't always trust them. So they volunteered to be first. And 2 days later, when the truck driver came back with the right password, we knew that they were delivered okay to the border. So that's all we knew. And then 2 days later, it was another group of 10. Other 8 people, plus I and my little brother went in. My oldest brother, Moshe, was caught. He was forging papers. You'll find out in my book about it. He was forging papers for some of the people, and he forged the head of Gestapo signature on those. Anyway, they arrested him. They took him to a concentration camp in Plaszow. And the only people left were my father, my mother, myself, and my little brother. Remember, my oldest sister is in Munkac, and my sister Lola and Michael are on their way to Munkac. They left through the border. And now it's our turn. So you can imagine we went into this truck, 10 of us, just like sardines, laying on the side of our bodies. And I'm facing my little brother, Tuli, and we're leaving. About 2 hours out of Bochnia, we're being stopped. Halt! And we see through the cracks of the truck, we see a bunch of soldiers with rifles. And we couldn't hear what they were talking to the driver, even though I spoke German, but the engine was so loud that I couldn't hear a word. And we were sure now somebody turned us in, they're gonna kill all of us. And then the truck started to move. When the truck moved, we felt a little better, but we felt they're taking us to a cemetery or to a forest. They're gonna shoot us or kill us. All of a sudden, the truck is moving, and we hear people walking on top of the coal on top, and we look through the crack. We see a soldier is standing on the step next to the driver, and on the other side, another soldier. And now there are soldiers on top of the coal, and we're being taken someplace. After about 2 hours of this, the truck stopped. And we were already saying our prayers. When the truck stopped, all of a sudden we heard, Dankeschön, Dankeschön. They were just hitchhiking. They had no idea that there were 10 Jewish people hiding in the same truck that they were hitchhiking on for about 2 hours with us. and they left us. And another few hours later, it was nighttime, we arrived at the forest on top of a hill, and the truck driver opened the gate and he asked us to come out, and he told all of us, walk up into that forest about 200 or 300 yards up the hill. You will see a tool shed. And inside the tool shed, there's the smuggler who happened to be a forest ranger. And he is the smuggler. He's waiting for you. So we all went up the hill and we went there. And sure enough, he was there. We were happy to see him. And he marched us out over about an hour and a half to his cabin. And he and his wife, they lived in a cabin in the forest, and the wife prepared the meal for us. We were able to wash up because we were full of dust, coal dust, and we were now ready to cross the border. What we had to do is go into the forest at a certain location and lay on the stomachs and wait until 3 a.m. At 3 a.m., the guards on top of the hill who were walking with their dogs would then walk down the hill, and they would meet fresh guards, and they have a little ceremony between them, and then the fresh guards would come up. But between the fresh guards and the old guards, there was a time enough to cross the border. So we were laying there 3 o'clock when they all marched down, and we felt they were far enough away where they can't hear us. We shimmied up the hill. The smuggler picked up the barbed wire, and we crossed to the other side. But he warned us that on the other side, right as we crossed the wire, there's a big ravine, and you're gonna fall unless you sit down and try and slide down holding hands. But be very quiet, because if they hear you, they'll come back and arrest you, kill you. So we did that. And on the other side of the wire, we sat down holding each other. And I'm holding my little brother on one side, and we're sliding down that hill. And then we came to a plateau and we stopped. Pitch black. You couldn't see your hands in front of you. And I asked my little brother, are you okay? He says, yes, he's okay. And suddenly somebody punches me on my shoulder. I almost jumped out. Who in this wilderness here, pitch black, who is this? He says, Beinisch? Now nobody calls me like that except my parents. Everybody else called me Ben, Benek, Bundy, but Beinisch? Says, I am your mother's brother, your uncle Bela. I came here to cross you across the border, save you. How did you know where to find me? He says, your sister Lola and Michael went through the same area about 2 or 3 days earlier, and they told us exactly where to wait for you. So we'll try to get you across the border into Hungary. So he took us to an apartment where my other uncle, his brother, was waiting for us. We were able to take a bath, clean up, and they had fresh, brand new clothes for us. And we put on the clothes, and the next morning we had to cross the other border to Hungary. Again, this is a very long story, how we crossed to Hungary, but we arrived on the other side of the border, and we are now in Hungary. There was a wagon with the driver, horse and buggy waiting for us. And as we went on the wagon, he took us to the next train station, and we waited for a train, and they took us to Budapest. We are now in Budapest, Hungary. So we're now in Budapest. I meet my sister Lola and Michael, and we're very happy. And of course, they had a meal for us. We had to do something in order to legalize ourselves. We had to go to the police station, and they had to put us in jail. And then my uncle would sign some papers to vouch for us. He is going to be our guardian, because we were still under 18. We were teenagers. So he signed the paper, and then they opened the jail and they let us out, and we were legally in Hungary now. We had papers as refugees, but we were allowed to be in Hungary. Next morning, he took us on a train to go to Munkacs. In Munkacs, we arrived a few hours later, and the whole family was waiting at the train station. My sister Goldie, my uncles, my aunts, my grandparents, everybody was waiting. They were so happy to see us. And one uncle asked if I and my little brother would stay in his house. He was a very wealthy man. He had a yardage store. He was selling yardage goods for men's suits and women's clothing. And then above the store, he had the house where he lived. Anyway, in Munkacs, life was going on like normal. There, people were going on weddings, bar mitzvahs, and proms, and they were sitting in outdoor cafes and laughing and joking and music going on and dancing. Life was going on as normal. I didn't see that for years already. But I told the people, you know, what's happening in Poland, all the people, I didn't know about concentration camps. I didn't know about death camps. But I did know that they were killing Jews who are hiding. And we didn't know what happened to those people who did go into those trucks and agreed to go to labor camp. Did they really take him to labor camp, or did they take him to extermination camps? I didn't know that. So if my parents knew something, they didn't tell us. But the next transport was supposed to be 8 other people, plus my father and my mother. They were supposed to arrive. We waited 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. They didn't arrive. Then somebody came across the border who told us, who knew what happened to my parents. He says, as they went into the truck, all 10 people, some Polish farmers saw what was happening, and they called the Gestapo. They came out, and everyone was pulled out of the truck. All 10 people, including the driver, who was now 11 people, and he was Polish, he wasn't Jewish. They were all taken against the wall, and everyone was shot. And he knows that because a Jewish policeman's job was to bury the people. So they were buried in a mass grave, and he even knew who it was who buried them. And now we found out the terrible thing and I'm telling people what's happening in Poland, but most of them didn't believe it. And family, of course, believed it, but they all said, look, this is never going to happen in Hungary because Hungary is an ally of Germany. Why would Why would Hitler siphon off soldiers from the front to occupy a friendly country when he is already losing the war? Well, but I told my uncle, look, just in case, if it happens that the Nazis ever come into Hungary, they will take all your valuables away. It would be nice if you had something that we can hide on our body, like diamonds or gold or jewelry. And he listened to me. And one day he came home with boxes full of shoes, and a shoe for every member of the family. And he told us that in the heels of the shoes, there are diamonds. Be aware that in your heels of the shoes, there are diamonds. And only in a life-threatening situation knows that you can have this to try and save your life. Well, he gave us all things, and nothing happened until in March of 1944. The Nazis just marched into Hungary like they were invited guests. And when they came in, there was no killing, no shooting. When they came in, they knew where every Jewish person lived. They knew our ages. They knew our professions, our business, schooling, everything. The question is how? We didn't have computers like we do today. The answer is IBM. IBM had punch cards that they sold. Now, IBM does not deny it. They know that they sold these punch cards to anyone who would pay the price, but they say they had no idea for what purpose they're going to use it. About 1 month later, the ordinance came out to Jewish people that we're all going to be relocated to Germany. Germany needs workers, so able-bodied men and women will be working, children will be schooled, older people will be cared for. Bring along all your valuables that you can carry, but leave everything else behind. And if anyone is found hiding, he will be shot on the spot. Well, they started to march us out, and everybody had bundles and valises. They carried all of their valuables with them. And we went, they took us to a brick factory. The brick factory was located right next to the railroad. And there were tracks in the brick factory. And there were the train tracks with cattle cars waiting there for us. And they lined us up, 82 cattle car to go in. And while we're waiting to go in, I see two men with a stretcher walking, and on the stretcher there was a woman, and they set her down like right in front of my feet. I take a look. It's my sister Goldie, my beautiful sister, face all bloodied and black and blue. And what happened to you, Goldie? She says she tried to escape, and she went as far as the railroad station. Inside the railroad station, a Hungarian gendarme recognized her because he went to school with her. He turned her over to the SS, and they beat her to a pulp. Now we were ordered to go in. We had to push her in, and 82 cattle car. Now, 82 cattle car might have been okay without the bundles and valises, but now with all those bundles and valises, if anyone wanted to sit down, someone else had to stand up. It was terrible. There were 2 buckets in the corner. Those buckets were filled with water. When the water was gone, there were no sanitary facilities, no toilets. One day, 2 days. The water was gone. People had to do something, so they used the buckets for their waste. And when the buckets were overfilling, now they were splashing all over the ground full of human waste. Now we were happy we had bundles. We can sit on top of the bundles instead of sitting in human waste. You can't imagine 1 day, 2 days of old people, pregnant women, babies, infants, screaming, yelling. It was terrible. 2 days. And the third day, of course, to the third night, we came across a station, we passed through it, and it said Oświęcim on top. Oświęcim is Polish for Auschwitz. Now, none of us inside knew who Auschwitz was, what Auschwitz was, or never heard of an Oświęcim. But they figured we were still in Poland, and the train went for another few 100 yards, and it stopped. It stopped, and we see a gate, and on the gate it says, Arbeit macht frei. Labor gives you freedom. Well, that made sense to us. That's a labor camp. This is probably where we will be working. We saw that, but the train only stayed there for a couple hours, and then it started to move further. And it moved another, I don't know, 3 kilometers, and it stopped. It was still nighttime, and the gates opened up, and all hell broke loose. We hear the Nazis with their dogs screaming, raus, raus, schnell. And we hear people screaming in all languages, come out, come out, come out right now. But leave all of your belonging where it is. Don't you pick up any of your belongings. Women and children to the right, a man to the left. And I'm holding on to my sister Goldie, my little brother Tully, and they were just pulled away from me, never to see again. Neither one of them, they both went to the gas chambers. Of course, I didn't know that. We didn't know where we are, or we didn't know about gas chambers. But I went with my uncle and my cousin. Why? Because I figured I was 15 and a half years old. I could have gone with the children or with the adults, but I figured if you're an adult, they'll put us to work, and if we work, they're gonna feed us better. But I had no idea about dying or killing or anything like that. But it was a strange place where moving forward little by little, and it was still dark, and we see those chimneys with flames shooting out of them, about 5 chimneys, and ashes are flying all over. So the men in front of us were saying, oh, those places must be places where they must be smelting factories, probably where we will be working. Who knew? Who had an idea? We didn't know what those ashes were, that those ashes were our family, our loved ones, the ashes they were burning. We don't know. But as I come closer and closer, I see this man with a white frock, just like a doctor. He had white gloves, and he goes with his index finger, right, left, right, left, right, left. And every once in a while, he would ask a question, talk to somebody. And when I came very close, there was a young man, maybe in his early 20s, that he's asking, kannst du 5 kilometers laufen? can you run 5 kilometers or would you rather go by truck? And he said, oh, he had a knee problem. He would rather go by truck. Poor soul, not realizing that meant certain death. They sent him to the right. But who knew? But something that makes sense to me. I was only 15 and a half, but I figured, why would he ask such a question? Can you run 5 kilometers? I can see the barracks. We're already in a camp. We finally got unloaded. That didn't make sense. So I figured he's testing them to see if they're strong enough to work. So I tell my uncle and my cousin, whatever he asks you, tell him, yes, you can run 5 kilometers. Yes, you're healthy, you can work. Be sure you tell him you're healthy, but let me go first because I spoke German. So I went first. And before he asked me a question, I stretched myself out, tiptoed, and I saluted him. And I said, 18 Jahre alt, gesund und arbeitsfähig. I'm 18 years old, I'm healthy and I can work. He did ask me, kannst du 5 kilometers laufen? Can you run 5 kilometers? And I said, jawohl. And he sent me to the left. My uncle and cousin were also sent to the left. And they marched us into a brick building. And that brick building like an auditorium. And they ordered us all to get undressed, get out of your clothes and your shoes, leave everything there on the floor and walk over to the line of barbers. They're going to cut your hair. And from there, you're going to go to the showers. Well, everybody got undressed. But remember, my shoes had diamonds in it. And I refused to get out of those shoes. My uncle who gave me those shoes and his son, who also was those shoes, they got out of the shoes. But I decided to keep my shoes on. And I walk over to the line of barbers, a bunch of inmates with their clippers, and they cut my hair. They were not exactly gentle the way they cut it either. But as they're cutting my hair, I'm still wearing my beautiful black shoes. No one is saying a word. And then they send me to go into the bathhouse, a big room and spigots on top of the ceiling. When they closed the door in that room, some people started to scream. And I didn't know why they screamed. I guess some people knew that the gas chambers looked like showers, but instead of water, gas would come out, cyclone something. Well, I had no idea, but when the water started to come out from those spigots, it got quiet. And we all took a shower. Then we had to go in front of this machine that blew the liquid off of us. And they, in other place, they pumped some DDT, some white powder all over us. And then we go to another place, they give us a number with a tag. My number was 41212. That was my name from that point on. We were told, don't you ever leave that number has to be on you all the time. They also gave me shoes. They were wooden shoes, wooden soles, but they had a canvas on top. I got into those shoes and I took my black shoes and I put them under my arm behind my jacket. And they marched us out to the barracks. And as we come in front of the barracks, it's still night, come in front of the barracks, the Stubenälteste, the man in charge of the barrack. He was an inmate. He comes out and he counted us. And then he tells us in a broken German, he says, "Ha, you Hungarian Jews, you think you're here on vacation? Think again. You see those chimneys, those ashes, those flames? Those are your mothers, your fathers, your brothers, and your sisters. And if you don't behave and do exactly what you're told, this is how you're going to wind up, ashes, ashes." We couldn't believe this. We couldn't believe this. My little brother, my sister, ashes. This is the 20th century. How is that possible? These are cultured, educated people. How can they do such a thing? He must be pulling our legs. But when we went inside, he told us to pick a bunk. And my uncle, my cousin, and I picked the upper bunk. There were 3 layers, an upper bunk. And we laid down. And as soon as we laid down, all 3 of us fell asleep. We were so tired. About a half hour or an hour later, my cousin wakes me up. He hits me. He said, Ben, get up, get up, get up. I said, whoa, what's going on? He says, listen. And I hear a chanting, a crying, or a singing, or a praying. We couldn't figure out what it was. And then he says, look, one side of the barrack had some boards missing from the wall. And we can see an orange hue, a big orange hue. And he says, what is that? I says, I don't know. But I knew that the Stubenälteste, the man in charge of the barrack, was Polish because I could detect in his accent. And I spoke Polish. So I walked, and I came with the Hungarian Jews, nobody. I walked over to him and I say, "Przepraszam bardzo," I'm sorry. I say in Polish to him, "Excuse me, can you tell me what I hear and what I see?" He was so happy to see someone speaking his language. He couldn't stop talking. He was telling me all the things that's happening in Auschwitz. He says, he says, what you see are flames. And what you see, there are people being burned in there. And he told me everything that I didn't even ask him. What's happening in Auschwitz? He says, you Hungarian Jews, you know nothing. 6 months before the Nazis ever occupied Hungary, they made us dig ditches for the influx of the Hungarian Jews. So now you know why Hungary was occupied. He says, we knew this 6 months before they even occupied Hungary. Those ditches were for Hungarian Jews because they knew that the trains with inmates, with people would come in so fast and furious that they wouldn't have time to go through regular channels. What are the regular channels? He tells me how long it takes to kill a person in a gas chamber. He says a half hour. But they didn't have the time to give a half hour to kill these people because the trains were just backing up full of Jewish people. So now they watched through the window, and if they saw the people were all laying on the ground quietly, they had the doors opened and they had to air it out for 15 minutes. And then the Sonderkommando, the man in charge, they were inmates. This was their job, had to pull out the bodies, pull out their gold teeth, cut their hair, and then put them on gurneys, 4 or 5 people with a rope on it, and take them to the crematorium. But they didn't have enough time for that either. So now they had dump trucks. They were dumping these half-dead bodies on these dump trucks and taking them to the fire pits. I said, well, what about that sound I hear? He says, Jechi, children. They didn't have time for children. They wouldn't even take the children into the gas chamber. Infants, they would simply have them wait outside, and then they threw them on top of these dead bodies in these trucks, and they would take them to these trucks and dump them into these fiery pits. I couldn't believe what he was telling me. Anyway, this is what was happening in Auschwitz. It just so happened that the fiery pits were like the second barrack away from us. We were in one barrack, and there was another barrack, and then they had the fiery pits. So we heard the screaming, and we heard all what was going on. And we were there for 2 weeks, and what we went through for 2 weeks, I don't have the time to tell you now, because it's something that will make your hair stand up. 2 weeks, and every morning we had to go out on appel where they counted us naked, and they wanted to see if we're still strong enough to work. And if they saw that we're too weak, they would take you and send you to the gas chambers. They had selections every morning, women and men, separate. They were separate barracks, but they selected even women. I heard after the wars that some women were punching their fingers, pricking their fingers so they can squeeze out a little blood and rub it into their faces so they have a little color in them so they wouldn't be selected for killing. Anyway, after 2 weeks, they put us in trucks, and they took us on a ride with these trucks, and we arrived at a camp called Durnhau, D-O-umlaut, Durnhau. And Durnhau was a rock quarry. What the work was, as we went to work, as they dynamited the mountain and boulders were coming down, it was our job with sledgehammers to break it up into smaller, manageable pieces, throw it into mining carts, run down the mining carts to the bottom where they had a grinding machine, and they ground it into gravel, and then push those carts back up and pound away on these rocks. It was back-breaking work, and I knew that my uncle is not going to survive that. So I went to the chef from the kitchen, and I bribed him with my diamonds from my shoes to give my uncle a job in the kitchen, which he did. He gave my uncle a job in the kitchen, and he took my diamonds. He took a few, but then whatever I had, and more, he wanted more. And when I had none of them left, he still let my uncle work there. Now, in the kitchen was easier work, and they can eat in the kitchen. But when they came out of the kitchen, they couldn't take anything in their pockets. They were searched. And if they would find any food in their pockets, they would kill them. So now my uncle could share his ration with his son and me because he was eating in the kitchen. So it got a little easier on us. But every day as we came back, we had to line up in rows of 5. Even the kitchen help had to come out. So my uncle would come out and everyone would be counted, and then they would be dismissed and take their ration and go up to their camp. We had a 2-story building. We were on the 2nd floor. They had showers. We'd shower there and go to bed. Anyway, but this one time we came back and they lined us up in row 5. My uncle comes in front of me, and finally the commandant comes down, and he came down with his Fräulein, his girlfriend. He says, I'm going to teach the Schweinhund a lesson they'll never forget. I'll teach these pig dogs a lesson we'll never forget. What happened? 3 inmates escaped, and because they escaped, he orders his henchmen to pull out every 10th person in line to receive 25 lashes. Well, as they're pulling out these people, I can see number 10. My uncle is going to be a 10. So I pushed him behind me and I took his place. They took me in the middle of the yard, and they brought in long, 1 by 1 inch, maybe 2.5 feet long stakes to hit us with. And they brought down a sawhorse. This is the sawhorse. And this is what he ordered us to do. Tiptoe, bend over the sawhorse, but your stomach cannot touch the 2x4 on top of the sawhorse. One man would pull your trousers like a drum, while the other one does the hitting, and you have to count loud. If you miscount it, you start from 1 again. If your heels touch the ground, you start from 1 again. If your stomach touches the 2x4 on that sawhorse, you start from 1 again. Well, I was number 4. There were 3 men ahead of me. The first one goes up, and every time they hit him, you can see a line of blood coming right through the trousers. And he yells out, 1, 2, 3, 4. Then he miscounted, and his feet touch the ground. His stomach touches the 2x4. Start again and again. Finally, he collapsed. When he collapsed, the commandant goes over, kicks him in the face. He says, get up. The poor guy couldn't get up. He pulls out the revolver and he shoots him right in his head, kills him. When he does that, his Fräulein, his girlfriend, goes over to him and gives him a hug and a kiss, like he just performed a heroic act. He killed a man. Now number 2 comes up. Number 2, the same way. Miscounted, his heel touched the ground, his stomach is touched, and count again from the beginning. Finally, he fell. And the commandant goes over, kicks him in the face, get up. He couldn't. He pulls out the revolver, shoots him. So we have 2 dead bodies. I'm number 4. Number 3 goes up. Number 3 was a little younger, and he also miscounted. And he touched this, he touched that, and they start again and again and again. Then he screamed out, have mercy on me, please don't kill me. Then the commandant says, then stand up and come walk over to me, face me. The poor guy stands up, makes about 4 or 5 steps, and his knees gave out from under him. He falls. The minute he falls, The commandant goes over, kills him. So I have 3 bodies, and I am next in line. I was the youngest from all of them. I remember walking up to that sawhorse, bending over, and I talked to myself. I says, Ben, this is it. If you want to survive this, you want to live another half hour, you have to do exactly what you're told. I walk over, I tiptoe, I bend over the sawhorse without touching the 2x4. One man is pulling my trousers and the other one starts to hit. And I am counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Finally, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 25, I made it. You could hear a pin drop in that camp because no one believed that anyone could survive this. And when I made it, the man who was holding my trousers real tight says to me in Yiddish, he says, walk over and thank him. And I stand up and I walk over, blood is running down my trousers. I walk over to him, I salute, and I said, Danke schön, Herr Kommandant. Thank you very much, Herr Kommandant. When he hears that, he puts his hand on my collar, and I wonder why. What is he going to kill me now for surviving this? He twists me around, facing the number 10s who are still to be beaten. He says, now I told you it could be done. If you do it like this, Junge, you have nothing to worry about. So he made an example out of me. And while this is going on, there is a commotion at the gate. They caught those 3 inmates. They were pulling them in. You couldn't recognize any of them, bloody, beaten to pieces, and they were pulling them in the gate. And when the commandant saw that, just like a child who gets sick of a toy and he pushes the toy away, he told us, all of us number 10, to go back in our line. And he orders his henchmen to bring down a portable gallows. They brought down a single gallows, and we all had to watch while they were hanging these 3 men one by one. I remember the last one was younger, and he was religious, I guess. He cried out a prayer, Shema Yisrael. This prayer is said before dying. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu. 2 more words, because it's only 6 words. When they heard it, they kicked the stool out from under him, and they wouldn't let him complete Adonai Echad, the last 2 words, God is one. They were such sadists, you can't believe. And right afterwards, they just told all of us to go get our rations and go up to our room. We were on the 2nd floor, and they had showers. Anyway, for weeks, I could not lay on my back because of the welts that I had from the beating. But somehow they healed up. You know, I only had to lay on my stomach. One night, we hear cannon fire, like the front was closing in. That morning, we report to go to work. As we came down to go to work, we hear a loudspeaker saying, no one is going to work today. The camp is being evacuated. Line up in rows of 5s, which we did. My cousin and I, we lined up in rows of 5. My uncle was already in the kitchen. We couldn't say goodbye to him. And they marched us out. That was called a death march, because if you could not keep up pace with the soldiers, they simply shot you. And all day long you heard pop, pop, pop being shot. 1 week, 2 weeks. And after about 2 weeks, my cousin got very weak. He says, "Ben, let me sit down at the snow. Everyone will pass, they'll shoot me. I can't take it anymore." I says, "No, Isaac, it's not gonna happen. We will both survive this. I will help you." And I helped him along, walking. I pulled him along. We had to march at a certain pace, the same pace as the soldier. And it was snow on the ground. His shoe fell apart already. He is walking barefooted. And then a couple days later, my shoe fell apart and I'm walking barefooted on snow. Now, we lost time. I don't remember if it was 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks. But I found out lately that it was 7 weeks that we marched from the labor camp, from Durnhau to Buchenwald. Is about 450 kilometers. And we marched there, arrived in Buchenwald. We were still alive. And when we came in, they lined us up and counted us. And they told us to go into this barrack. Inside the barrack, they'll feed you. You can shower. They'll give you fresh clothes and fresh shoes. But tomorrow morning, early in the morning, you better come back to this spot at 9 a.m. because Buchenwald is also being evacuated. Well, when they said that, we did go in and we bathed. Now this picture that you see is of me in Buchenwald in the bed, in the showers. Who took that picture? I have no idea. Must have been one of the soldiers. But there's a whole story behind it, how this picture was found and by whom. And so again, this had to be a separate time. There's not enough time about this. But right now, we are being fed and they gave us fresh clothes. And it's next morning, we had to go out there, we line up again, and they counted us. And they marched us out about 300 yards out of the camp of Buchenwald. You see a bunch of cattle cars lined up again. Whole bunch of cattle cars, and they counted us 80 to a cattle car, and they tell us to get in. So I helped my cousin to go in. I says, when you're inside, find a spot against the wall and save me a spot because I'll come right behind you. Because I remember being in a cattle cart going to Auschwitz, and it was people all around me. It was terrible. So I says, find a spot so that we can lean our back against the wall. And he did. He found it. And then I went in and I found a good spot next to him. They closed the gate. An hour later, they opened the gate and they threw in 80 breads, a bread for each person. Picture this. Those people who were next to the door were grabbing 4 or 5 breads. And those people against the wall had nothing. And I and my cousin, we had no bread. We don't know where we're going, for how long we're going to be gone. I had to get a bread. So I started to climb over the sitting inmates' heads to get to the door to see if I can wrestle out the bread from one of the man who had several breads. And as I'm climbing on the inmates, one of them had a pocket knife and he stabs me. Now I feel the stab in my throat. In my mouth, there's blood filling up. And I couldn't stop. I had to go get the bread. So I keep climbing. I climb and I see this man had 5 breads. So I pull one bread away from him. He punches me. I put the bread in my back pocket and I climb back to my cousin. My cousin says, Ben, what's happening? You're bleeding. I put my finger here and went right through the tongue. I had this gash right through here. And to this date, I still have a mark over my chin bone because I filled out. I was very skinny and it was the middle of my throat. But anyway, how I survived. People, 1 week, 2 weeks, people were dying. We stop and go, stop and go, and stop and go. And people all around me were dying. I had enough willpower. I had this one bread and I kept it in the pocket, the back pocket. And every night, in the middle of the night, the size of a half an egg, I would give to my cousin, and a half an egg I would take to myself. And that bread lasted out like that for 2 weeks. We only had every day a small little piece, the size of a half an egg. Imagine the willpower, having bread here and starving. You're so starved and having enough willpower to keep rationing it. And for some reason or another, we survived the 2 weeks. And the train is going for another week. After 3 weeks, it finally arrived at a place called Dachau. They opened up the door. Almost everybody, and practically everybody was dead. And they say, whoever can walk out over the tracks and into the camp of Dachau. So I helped my cousin and somehow we were able to walk holding each other, going up into the camp. Now, from the 80 of us in the cattle car, I don't think there were 3 of us, or maybe 4 of us. I didn't count walking out. Everyone else was dead. And now we're coming inside and we see a mountain full of dead bodies. Next to the crematorium, I guess the Nazis ran out of coal, so they couldn't burn the bodies. There was a mountain there full of bodies. And they put me right in a barrack right next to these bodies. This is what we saw inside. This is how we were. We're all bone, skin and bone. We were just skeletons. And they put me in a barrack right next to these bodies. And we lay there on the floor, my cousin and I, 1 day, 2 days. And some of the inmates brought us a little water, gave us a little soup. From there, they were nice enough. But we had no rations. And after the 3rd day, finally we hear, Befreiung, Befreiung, liberation, Americans, Americans. We heard that. I said to my cousin, let's go out and see what happened. So holding each other, we go out and we see that the inmates are crawling on their hands and feet and kissing the boots from the GIs. They looked like gods to us. They came to free us. And my God, we were standing in the middle of the yard and 2 GIs walked up to us. They opened up a can of Spam and it smelled so good. They handed it to us and we made a mistake. We ate some of it. Both of us came down with dysentery. That night, my cousin dies in my arms. and I'm talking to him. I can't believe he's dead. I'm talking to him. And while I'm talking to him, somebody heard that. They walked up and they came back and they took my cousin away. When they're taking him away, I followed. I didn't want to see where you're taking them. And while I'm following, my knees gave out from under me and I fell down. When I fell down, they took me against the wall there. And I lay there. Towards the evening, a man walks up to me, beautifully dressed with a nice suit. And he asked me what language I speak. I told him I spoke several languages, but I was born in Poland. Poland, he says, I'm Polish. And he introduces himself. He is a Jesuit priest. And he came with a bunch of nuns and doctors from Paris, and they're opening up a field hospital in the yard of Dachau, and he's going to take me to the field hospital. So he picks me up like a sack of bones, which I was. I was, at the age of 16, I probably weighed about 55, maybe 60 pounds. And he carries me to the infirmary. On the way, he tells me something that I never forgot. He says, Benek, you Jewish people went through such terrible things. All the punishments that you received for one sin, that you were born to Jewish parents, how terrible it is. He says, however, Benek, don't you ever abandon your noble religion. To hear that from a Jesuit priest in 1945 was very unusual. So, but this is what happened. I never forgot it. He took me inside, and none was waiting for me. They put me on a cot with a sheet. She took my vitals, and I passed out. 2.5 months later, I woke up in Sant'Ottilian, in a monastery. In this monastery in Bavaria, the monks gave up one building. They made a hospital out of it for the inmates from Dachau, mostly, but all survivors. And this is where I woke up 2.5 months later. To tell you my story from this point on, I would need another hour. I can't. I'm asking you again, if you can get my book, please do so. My daughter Gail would tell you the story from that point. And this is now 70, I think it's 71 years later. I'm alive and I live here in Las Vegas. I have 2 wonderful daughters, 4 grandchildren, 5 great-grandchildren. Despite Hitler, we're all here. And my daughter and my granddaughter, Robin, this is my family now. They're all helping out in the ZACHOR Holocaust Remembrance Foundation to keep the world from acquiring amnesia. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, go right ahead and ask.
Yes, absolutely. We have a few questions, and I'll go ahead and we'll jump right into that. And again, in the chat feature, I have the ZACHOR Foundation website. First of all, Ben, thank you so much for sharing your story with all of these people around the world. And thank you to Howard and his team at Temple Beth Or for helping produce this. So we'll just go ahead and jump right into the questions. One of the first questions that was messaged to me, there are many survivors who never spoke about what they went through what initially motivated you to talk about your story again, and then ultimately to write your book? And we'll have the link to where you can get Ben's book in the chat feature.
Okay. For years, I didn't tell my kids, I have 2 daughters, I didn't tell them anything about the atrocities in the Holocaust. I didn't want my kids to grow up feeling that they're different than all their friends. I wanted to make sure they go to a public school and they mingle with other nationalities. They had friends from all nationalities. And they grew up in a nice home like American kids. But after my grandson asked me from 5th grade, he says, Papa, he calls me up, my teacher found out that you are a survivor, and she was wondering if you would come and tell your story. Well, my grandson asked me, I really had to make a decision, but I figured now my children are already grown up, they're married, they have children of their own, and my grandson is asking me, I must go in and talk. So I agreed. I remember going to 5th grade. I was wondering, what am I going to tell 5th graders? And are they going to have nightmares? What happened? I remember going to the school and touching the doorknob. It's like walking into a principal's office. I was scared, and I came in. They gave me 1 hour to speak from 10 to 11. And I spoke from 10 to 11, from 11 to 12, and none of the kids budged. The school bell rang for lunch, and the teacher chased them out. But instead of going for lunch, they surrounded me in the hall with questions. They just couldn't believe what they just heard. Some of them wanted to touch me, just to be near me. Forget about lunch. All they wanted is answers. And that's when I said, Ben, you can't keep silent. The world has to know. And I made a vow to myself that I'm going to do something. And just about that time, I retired. I moved to Las Vegas. In Las Vegas, the Holocaust Survivors Group of Southern Nevada asked for volunteers to speak. And of course, I volunteered. And I started to speak, and I haven't stopped till this day. I still speak. And it's so important. And I'm so grateful for you listeners that you're interested enough and hear this, because the world has to know. You cannot allow the world to acquire amnesia. And I founded the ZACHOR Holocaust Remembrance Foundation. And for the last 25 years, I devoted my life to this. That's all I do. I write, I blogs, and we talk to people. We give out these pins. These ZACHOR little pins, which means remember the Holocaust. These pins, I've given out now almost 750,000 of these pins. Every listener usually gets a pin, but lately, of course, I speak on Zoom. I have no way of doing it. When I used to speak in schools and colleges and meet people, I would give every listener a pin. So if you want to get some pins, you can get it from us. Any other questions?
Yes, sir. And first of all, thank you for speaking to so many students and so many teachers and just willing participants who just want to hear your story from around the world. Not many of you might or might not know this, but Ben has actually been connected to tens of thousands of students and teachers from all over the world. And so we thank you for continuing to share your story. I have a really interesting question from James from Temple Beth Torah in California. James, I'm unmuting you and you should be able to ask your question.
Hi, Ben. Thanks. Like you said, thank you for sharing your story. It's hard to listen to, some pretty horrific things you went through, but I really appreciate you sharing them. My parents were in Budapest during the war and were in hiding, and we lost many relatives. So I can relate to some of it. I was curious, you went through so much from several death camps, work camps, cattle cars, and what gave you a will to survive through all of that? Most of us, I think, would have given up long ago, long before that.
Very good question. It's human nature to live. You want to live. And I can't answer this question exactly. I sort of had the feeling all the time at the camps that I will survive, somehow survive. And I did everything they asked me to do, and I did it better than what they asked to do. I never wanted to give them a chance to single me out and maybe pull me out and kill me. So, but our life was hanging on the thread every day, every minute. And of course, it was up to our health. And as long as I was able to stay healthy enough to survive this, I did. Most people could not, and most people, I was about the youngest among them. Remember, walk 7 weeks, walking on snow and barefooted. To this day, I have problems with my feet. I have to sleep with a heating pad all night, winter or summer, it doesn't matter. I walked for miles and miles barefooted, and I had to keep up pace. So I always had the will to live, and I guess it's human nature. But yes, a lot of people gave up, and I can't speak for them, but for me, I wanted to live and I survived.
Well, we're certainly glad that you could be here with us today and share your story with all of these wonderful people here. One of which is Harvey from Brownstein, Larchmont, New York. And he wanted to say thank you for being such a miracle and being with us today.
Thank you.
Our final question before we let everyone go is, what advice would you give to the next generation to prevent the events of the Holocaust from ever happening again?
Yeah. My advice is to stop the hatred. Hitler and the Nazis did not start by killing. It all started with hate. Hate, propaganda. And this is how it starts. When you bully someone in school, you make an enemy for life. That person who has been bullied will never forget you. And you would be an enemy to him. Now, we never know how this person is going to work out in life, and he may blame you for all his problems. So you don't want to graduate school and have enemies waiting there. I feel that if you hate somebody strong enough, it may be easy for that person to kill. Who knows? So all I can tell you is stop the hatred. The hatred has to stop. Why can't we live side by side and appreciate our differences rather than hate them? Maybe we'll learn something from each other. We are all God's creation. This is how I feel. We are all God's creation. And as such, we all have the right to exist in this world. and we should stop the hatred. Enjoy the differences rather than hate. You know, Hitler foresaw a world with Übermenschen. Übermenschen means more than human. And to his mind, it was the blonde people, you know, that was his vision. And he
Blue eyes.
Yeah, blue eyes, blonde people. He didn't even qualify for that. But that's the vision he saw. Now imagine a world that everybody looks the same and everybody believes the same. Nazism, because if you were not a Nazi, you didn't have a right to live. We would be like a world, like a bunch of ants following a leader. The beauty in this world is that we are different. We look different. We think different. That's what makes it beautiful. So why hate? There is absolutely no reason. This has to stop. And the youngsters have to know that hatred could lead to terrible things.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much for sharing your wisdom, sharing your story, and spending a couple of hours with so many wonderful people here today. Along with ZACHOR Foundation, we also have an offshoot of the ZACHOR Foundation called I Shout Out, and it's a call to action for anyone wanting to speak out against intolerance, injustice, racism, or just bullying. So the website is here on the chat. So before we go, we want to say thank you, Ben. Thank you, Howard. Thank you, Gail and Robin and all the wonderful people over at ZACHOR. And I'm going to go ahead, before I end the meeting for all, I'm going to unmute all. Can we just say thank you to Ben for sharing his amazing story with us today?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you,
Ben.
Ben.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you for listening.